Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 28, brought to you by Black Belt Magazine. And I am extremely excited because today we have a very special guest, a friend of mine, a brother of mine, one of the executive staff members of Team Paul Mitchell, and one of Team Paul Mitchell's founders, Mr. Steve Babcock. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jackson.
Much appreciated. And so for my sport karate audience, a lot of you probably already know who this man is because he is the tall Paul Mitchell guy, quote unquote, right? It's like all the Paul Mitchell executive members have these different titles, right? Like the scary one is Coach Damon, right? Coach Chris has the glasses, right? The enforcer, exactly, right? But then it turns out that everybody's super friendly, you know what I mean? Everybody's always just like apprehensive because you're the Paul Mitchell guys, you know what I mean? But anyway, so today what we're going to be getting into is some of the stories about the beginning of the team. But before we get into that, give us a little bit of your own bio. What got you into martial arts? Tell us about your martial arts.
Okay, I went to high school as my freshman. Sometimes high school can be intimidating. And my high school had about 2,500 kids in it. And it was a little bit wild when I went my first year. Actually, as a sophomore, the superintendent left and was completely taken over in new rules and it started to come around. But my freshman year was a little bit wild at my high school. And, you know, I felt intimidated and I was getting bullied. So I said, I want to learn how to protect myself. So when I started karate, it was for the reason of just learning how to fight, basically. And, a lot of people, when they join in the beginning, they have certain reasons, like I want self-defense, or I want a good fitness, or I like a social thing. Mine was for the self-defense. But then, I kind of got good at the self-defense after about a year, and then I stuck with it for all the right reasons. I might have joined in the beginning to learn how to fight, but I stuck with it for all the right reasons after that. And, it became something I loved. I was a big-time skier at that time, and I was actually thinking of being I want to be a professional skier. And I completely dropped skiing and took on karate instead. So it became my love. It became my love when I was a kid.
So what got you into competing? Because for those of you who don't know, he's not just a coach and one of the founders of Team Paul Mitchell. He's also a world champion, had a near undefeated season, right?
I had an undefeated season.
1991 or 1990. Right. So world-class fighter, right? So what got you into competition? When I was in my high school years, I actually joined a kickboxing team named the Rhode Island Thunderbolts. A fantastic trainer. I just had a kind of reunion with all the guys on the Thunderbolts, and these were some of the best mentors in my life, to be honest with you. And they still, I hang out with them every now and then still, and I love to hang out with them and still get advice from them. But I started in kickboxing, and then after a while, I just kickboxing was like you would do one fight a year. You know what I'm saying? And I said, I want to fight more. I want to spar more. And, when you enter the tournament, you do 2 or 3 matches a tournament. They weren't as intense as maybe a big kickboxing fight, but the whole day of the tournament might be as intense or more. So I really just loved competing. So I said, one fight a year as opposed to being able to go to 20 tournaments a year. Sometimes in the beginning we did like Saturday tournament in Massachusetts, Sunday tournament in Connecticut, So I just liked the fact that, with a karate tournament, you could compete a lot more, and you had a lot different type of fighters per tournament, so it made me a lot more versatile in my growth. So I really saw that at a younger age. I really got started in tournaments late. I got started in tournaments at about 22. I wish I got started in tournaments a little bit earlier, but I saw the quickest growth is that I could enter many different tournaments and have a lot of different type of competitors as I entered the tournament. So. And we mentioned it casually, the fact that you had an undefeated season, right? And when you're attending so many tournaments like that with so many fights per tournament, that's an incredible feat. I mean, we see it happen occasionally, I feel like a little bit more often in forms and weapons, because forms and weapons competitors at the adult level, you can do 2 or 3 forms per tournament. Some do more, some do a little bit less, right? But it's seemingly more feasible in the forms and weapons world. But for a fighter to go undefeated for an entire season, that is really, really rare.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about that season before we get into the Paul Mitchell stuff. What did that take? What was that like?
I'm going to tell you something. What I just focused on was I ran 3 miles 3 times a week. I did 100 sit-ups almost every day. So I had my own training regimen. I had the drills, and I still looked at fighters around the circuit that I saw certain things I liked that they did. I always loved to be a student, and I would pick up those drills and add them to my training repertoire, but that's what I focused on. I focused on one drill, 1 point at a time. And it seemed like the season was going along and I was near the end of it, and somebody actually said, you know, you're undefeated right now. And in a way, I didn't even know it. And it almost felt like, to me, like it's like you're telling a guy who's pitching a no-hitter, you know, you're pitching a no-hitter. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't focus. That guy who's pitching the no-hitter would sit back and go, but the team's going to win the game. You know what I'm saying? Just focus on those things. So I didn't focus on an undefeated season at all. I just focused on my drills, 1 point at a time, one match at a time, being very competitive because I have a competitive nature, being very competitive and just doing what I needed to do one step at a time. And then before I knew it, I finished with an undefeated season. So it was pretty cool.
That's super cool, right? And you knew going into that last match because somebody had told you, right? Before that last match, but somebody had told you were undefeated. So take us through the emotions going into the last fight.
Some of those matches were actually for the overall title. So this was in the NBL, and it was for the overall title to get your to be the United States champion.
So this is at Super Grand, or was it
Super Grand?
Okay.
Yeah. So at that point, just that overall title was even more important than an undefeated season. Almost like if the Patriots won the Super Bowl that year, they would have been undefeated. They should have just focused on winning the Super Bowl and not the undefeated season. Though I'm not a Pats fan as much. But you know, I focused on just my fights I needed to do. And I sat there, any fighter does this. He sits there and he studies the ring. He studies the opponents. In my last match, some of the matches were pretty tight, but the way the brackets worked out in my last match, I ended up beating the guy by 17 points. So I was on fire. And a little story to that is, you know, we're fighters. So that guy kind of knew he was losing. So he started taking some cheap shots at me and he hit me with a hard punch in the face right after. So I thought I'd battle with him and throw a hard technique back at him. And then all of a sudden it was all over and everything was done. I noticed he hit me in my right down here on my left, no, my chin, and I had to go get stitches in my chin after. And at that same time, my whole team is getting, which I didn't even know about, was getting a picture on the cover of a magazine because they did well at that tournament and won their own. Pedro, John Payton, won their own national titles, and I'm in the hospital. So you can look at that magazine and go, where's Steve? He had an undefeated season. Where is he? I was in the hospital getting stitches. So. I kind of learned a lesson to where, you know, just focus on your thing. Don't even bring like I'm a fighter into this and I want to like throw down in that way. Don't even bring that because it really kind of made me take a step back. So.
Right, and you mentioned you were competing alongside some incredible teammates, Xavier, et cetera.
Yes.
Who would you say, and this is the last individual question, who would you say was your biggest adversary, your biggest competition? Who was the guy that gave you the toughest fights?
On my team?
On your team or just in general on that season?
Anthony, I would consider myself the fighter I am today because I had to go against Richard Plowden and Anthony Price. More Anthony Price, we ended up sparring each other. And we were best of friends, almost like, you know, like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. They were rivals, but they ended up becoming best of friends. Anthony was a better fighter than me when I first started in the tournaments, though, so I looked up to him. I have a lot of second places to him. I end up taking a few first, and, you know, he'd give me kudos for that, but the fact that you know, I really liked him as a friend, but when I was thinking of all my training, it eventually went to, I have to beat Anthony Price. And he was a fantastic fighter at that time.
Oh, yeah,
very well-rounded.
Two all-time greats.
Yeah, very well-rounded.
Very cool. So now, I know that you've been wanting to get to the Paul Mitchell story, because that's your favorite story to tell, right? So I know this history, but a lot of our viewers don't, right? So take us all the way back to a team called Spider Brand, which a lot of our viewers probably won't even know what that is, right? Tell us, what is the origin story of Team Paul Mitchell Crow?
Okay, so I had just moved back from LA, where I was renting, where John Paul was actually my landlord. So that's how I got to know him.
John Paul DeJoria, CEO of Paul Mitchell Systems.
Correct. Yes. And I come back, and a friend of mine who was just awesome. I idolized him when I was going out through all my belts when he was a black belt and I was a white belt. He just got out of the service. And this is the guy right here. I actually keep a picture of him. This is the founder of Spider Brand team. In a way, his name was David Randall. And I consider him, in a way, the founder of Team Paul Mitchell because the Spider Brand team became Team Paul Mitchell. So he said, hey, Steve, I got this team going. And I wasn't the best point fighter at that time. I was more of a kickboxer. And he brought me along and, taught me a little bit how to change my fighting style. But he said, I'd like you to be on the Spider Brand team with me. So that's how I started on the Spider Brand team. We went for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden we went to one tournament. I think Bernie Ringetti was the name of the sponsor of the Spider Brand team. And he tried hard, but just things were tricky. He used to give equipment and bags to the tournament owner for registration fees, and then help us out with some hotel rooms and stuff. And I give kudos to all the teams out there right now. I see their beginning stages, and I remember my beginning stages in the way I fought, and I was proud of my team. And no matter what sponsorship you're getting here or here, that's what it's about, the way you fight and the pride you have for your team. So I really give kudos to some of these other teams out there, because I remember when I was on Spider Brand. And we went to one particular tournament, Jean Frenet's tournament. We had to be there at 6 in the morning and ended at 3 at night, 3 the next morning. And it ended with Nasty Anderson and Kevin Thompson going 1-1 over. I think Kevin beat him 2-1 in overtime. But at that tournament, Bernie didn't end up working out a deal, and it was up in Canada. We did a long drive. So Bernie didn't end up working out a deal with the promoter. So we're up there, we don't have hotel rooms. We don't have registration fee. We come back, we have a team meeting. Where everybody's starting to think of, okay, anybody know some sponsors? Some people come up with names, and also I just said, I know the owner of Paul Mitchell Hair Products.
What was the reaction in the room like? 'Cause you're like, we don't have any money, we need a sponsor. You're like, oh, I know this billionaire.
Well, at that time, nobody knew who Paul Mitchell Hair Products was. So, except for Mike Conroy, because his wife at that time was a hairdresser. Oh yeah, Paul Mitchell, that's a good company. Excellent company. So, we ended up the meeting with, hey, let's look at that as plan A, but just in case we have a plan B, which wasn't really what this turned out to be at all. I'm glad plan A turned out. A plan B and a plan C, and then we sparred a little bit, and all the guys were hanging out, and maybe we went out for some lemonades or something after. None of us were really drinkers at all at that point. So we went out and had some lemonades or something after, and we left off with, hey, I'll give him a call and see how he feels about it. Well, at that time, they hadn't sponsored any sports teams at all. So I gave him a call and I said, hey, John Paul, when I talked to him about it, I said, how would you like to sponsor a karate team? I can remember when I was working out in LA, he'd come over and he'd watch me working out on the bag and stuff because I rented from him. And I said, maybe I'll ask this guy if he'd sponsor me at some point. I was thinking more for myself because I wanted to go on and do big things in karate.
Well, you were also a kickboxer at the time, which is more of a self-sponsored ordeal.
And so I can remember I wanted to ask him that, but then when this situation arose, I said, well, let me talk to him about a team. He said, Steve, send me an itemized proposal, and then I'll see how it looks. And that was 33 years ago, or 32 years ago, and here we are still. So, I sent him the itemized budget, and he said, Steve, it all looks good. And he started out and he said, I'm going to send you a check, and you can get this started. And here we are.
That's awesome.
But that same respect, where I break down, like, this is what we do, this is the team we are, this is what we do, and this is who we are. Every year I would call him back up and say, this is what we've been doing. And I'd keep him in touch during the year a little bit. And every year I would say, and how do you feel about sponsors for another year? And So I feel that same way every year, even at 28, year 28 or year 29 or year 30. I am grateful and thankful for every year they decide to do the wonderful thing and sponsor these athletes and even sport karate in general. Because I just reflected on this recently of how many lives, because I know how it changed my life to be a part of Team Paul Mitchell, but we've had 130 athletes in our team, and or some over 100, and I think in that time, it's positively affected each athlete to go on and do better things in their life. The influence of that Paul Mitchell got involved with these athletes. I think it's been a positive influence. So I'm just ecstatic about it and grateful still to this day. So.
Absolutely. And as a player for the team, I have the same sentiment of just gratitude for the fact that has continued for so many years.
Yes, yes.
And one really interesting part of the story that I know that you would be too humble to just come out and say, so I'll bring it up so that you can talk about it, is it's not just like your itemized proposal and everything was so great that John Paul was just like, okay, let's do it. It's because you developed a relationship with him through some of your own acts. I've heard a story before, something about you had to rent some equipment from him or borrow, and there was a deal made or whatever. Tell us about that so we understand, because that's an important life lesson.
So I'm this kid.
John Paul trusted you.
I'm this kid.
Still trust you.
And I could see it all. I saw it all when it happened. I'm this kid from this little small town where the words that come out of my mouth are a good check. I'm a sincere person, and I'm a person of integrity, which the martial arts showed me. And I'm out there, and I'm just saying, all of a sudden, rent was a little tough to make here and there, and he was my landlord. So I went to him and I said, hey, can I do some work around your house? Because it needed some work. I lived with a few other roommates. It was a big house, so it needed some work. He said, sure, Steve, you can do some work around. I'll pay you on the side, and you can catch up on some rent when you do that work and stuff. And then one of the jobs back in those days was they had these bubble ceilings. So I had to go to a rent-a-center and rent like a gun that would shoot the bubble up on the ceiling. Well, to do that back in those days at rent-a-centers, you needed a credit card in order to hold because of damage of the property. So I went to him and I said, John Paul, listen, I need to borrow a credit card because I need to do this and blah, blah, blah. Now I understand it, but at that time it was as sincere as can be. I needed to borrow a credit card because they needed it to hold the item for damages and whatnot. And when it was done, it would be released. And he looked at me and he was like, okay, Steve, here's my credit card. And I took his credit card and I did exactly with it what I said I was going to do. And then at the end of it, some of my roommates who were longtime LAers said, hey, Steve, how'd you get that? Steve, how'd you get that ceiling done? I said, well, John Paul, let me borrow his credit. I got credit on it. He did what? Do you still have it? And right at that point, I said, wow. I said, I know what just happened. And of course I didn't have it. I gave it back to him when I was done with it. I knew it just happened. It was a big thing. And, it allowed me to say, my natural instincts of just being, even gullible at sometimes, really turned out to be, my good nature really turned out to be something good, to show this man who was awesome to me, what my good nature would do, and I was a man of my word. So that's how it started out.
I love that story because of how pure the story is. I mean, it's a heartwarming story just to hear that little interaction. So take us back a little bit further. First time you met John Paul, first time you shook his hand. What was that interaction? How did that happen?
Well, back in the 80s, there was MTV was huge. So there was a band called ZZ Top, and they came out with this song Legs, and Legs was his actual girlfriend. And that's how I met John Paul, was Wendy and her brother invited me out to say, hey, come and live in LA. We have a place you can stay. You're gonna have a job waiting for you. So I said, hey, I'll try it out. So we rented another house first, and then all of a sudden I had met him, and I ended up renting from him. But it was something. I think when I met him, he was actually still doing some of his, the Paul Mitchell, even out of his garage in one of the houses he lived in. And the Santa Clarita office was, I don't even know the exact facts, so I don't want to say them, but, and the big office wasn't even open yet. But in that hotel, one of my favorite clubs I went to was in the hotel that the movie Pretty Woman was in at the end of Wilshire Boulevard. And he actually came to my 21st birthday that I had at that hotel and that nightclub. And we just became good friends. We bonded pretty well right from the beginning. I probably saw him maybe 20 times a year, just interacting with him. But, he interacts with a lot of people. And if they're a person of their word, I think he treats a lot of people. I think he does a lot of wonderful things for a lot of people that he trusts. So we just became friends from there, and it was wonderful.
Very cool. So when you hang out that much with a billionaire, there has to be some stories that come with it. And, we call him a billionaire because that's what he's famous for, right? But, the thing that I know from, having brunch with him in Vegas and among other things, a little subtle flex there, but I had brunch with John Paul, as well as the rest of Team Paul Mitchell. But anyway, it's the thing that we respect so much about him is how down to earth and how generous he is. Anybody can go watch the movie Good Fortune. It's on, I believe it's still available on Apple. If you go on iTunes, you can find that movie. And it talks a little bit about, who John Paul is and what he represents. But aside from that, right, everybody else knows him as a billionaire. So when you hang out with a billionaire that often, there has to be some cool stories there, right?
Oh, sure.
What is your number one, John Paul billionaire story?
I have a few cool stories. I mean, when our whole team went to New York the first time, he would want to do dinner. He would want to do a lunch with us, once or twice a year with the whole team. So come on to New York, come and visit. I mean, all of a sudden he chucks a bunch of those guys, and we figured we'd be taking a limo. I think a few guys chucked him. No, I'll do the cab with you. And then, I don't know if you've ever been on the cab ride in New York. He's like this, But no, that was one story. But he helped me out a little bit personally on an investment, which I ended up paying him back for. And I used to have to go to meetings with him with that. And we were in Hawaii once for when the team took its first overall championship of the year, way back in the beginning. He said, I'm gonna fly out to the Hawaii Paul Mitchell event. And I ended up, there was this actor called James Coburn. I think he actually studied with Bruce Lee. And I ended up also had a meeting with him, and I walk in the room, a lot of things I had to talk to him about. And go in the room, and he's like, it's me sitting here, there's James Coburn sitting here, and there's John Paul sitting here. And he starts the meeting off with, I'm starting this new tequila company. And before we do anything, we got to do a couple of shots tequila. This is a great company, and you guys are going to love it. So before I know it, I have, and one shot didn't end, but I had two shots in it. And we went on, the meeting basically didn't even take place because I was incoherent almost. No, I'm joking. But we ended up just talking about karate because James Coburn had studied with Bruce Lee, and we ended up just hanging out for about a half hour or 45 minutes and just having a great time. And to me, it was surreal. I mean, you might not know James Coburn, but I heard the name. I grew up watching some of his movies, and it was that long ago, this was in the 80s, that he was still around a little bit. So I'm sitting here having a big time meeting that was affecting my life with John Paul and James Coburn, and we were just sitting there kind of having a fun time and just relaxing. And like, Steve, you're all set on that. We can move forward with the project. And everything went perfect with that, but then the meeting was over like that. We ended up hanging out for 45 minutes and just having a great time. So that was probably one of my better stories.
And that could have been the birth of Patron, right? I mean, he was just
it was right near the beginning of Patron. In fact, actually, he gave me a bottle that was like one of the first bottles Patron did, and I still have it.
I was about to say, did you drink it?
No, it's a bottle we finished. We didn't.
Trust
me, we didn't do a whole bottle. There was a little left in it, and I might have had 2 shots, but it was done. And then those original bottles had caps, like cork caps in them. So it was one of those bottles. So I have one of the original bottles from when Patron started. He gave me one of those, and then he also gave me about 3 years ago, he gave me this like $500 bottle of Patron, and I saved that one too, because he sold the company, and these could be collector's items at some time, I don't know, but they're special to me. So I have one little shelf that I put that bottle on, the original Patron bottle, and we also got a 30th anniversary water cup from Century that, and that's untouched. I don't touch that, and I keep them all on the same shelf, kind of as nice, sweet memories of our wonderful journey that we've had. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a little aside here because that reminds me of something. So a lot of the Team Paul Mitchell members know of the legendary place that is your attic, right? Because Steve's attic, which by the way, we're in the karate school, so he has an attic directly above us that way, right? And it houses so much sport karate history. There's a famous Paul Mitchell photo shoot that has a big John Paul Mitchell Systems banner behind it. That banner is in the attic. The first ever Spider brand uniform is in the attic, right? So it is the closest thing that we have to a historic sport karate museum that is literally right above our heads. Right now. Exactly. So what are some of the coolest things up there? Like what are some of your most prized
what I did was I like that Spider brand. I like the guts of where the team came from and the people who founded it. And in these this beginning young team that was coming out of New England, really bonding with each other and trying their best to do what they do with a fantastic team out there at that point called Trans World Oil. We were actually modeling some of the things that they did, and we looked up to them in some ways, and modeling some of the things that they did. But I like that. What created that attic was every year, not as much anymore because Century is our apparel sponsor and we do different things, but every year I went out and I would get the uniforms for the teams and the sweatsuits, and I would go to different vendors every year, and I would usually get extras. So there are leftovers. I end up throwing some away at this point just to clean out, but there are leftovers. I keep memorabilia from almost every year. I have my first original jacket that I wore from John Paul. I have my first gi. I have some of these old purple and white gis that were kind of satin on the side. I have my first original t-shirt, and I just kept them. They were memories, they were when I actually see them, I can almost flash myself back to when I wore it and those times when I trained and stuff. And I remember getting gis and stuff with people's names on them, embroidered on them. There's some touching ones where I have Richard Brandon's gi. He gave me a leather jacket once that I gave to a teammate because it didn't fit me anymore.
Jake Presley has that jacket.
And I remember he was buying a bunch of jackets at that time. Well, I can get these jackets, so I ended up purchasing a little bit. So it was just a good thing.
And for those that don't know, Richard Brandon, legendary Team Paul Mitchell member, one of the greatest Chinese martial artists to ever compete in sport karate, passed away a few years ago. Was it cancer?
Maybe about 8 years ago. Yeah. And then it was really, Richard and I were close with any of my teammates. I mean, it's like a family. And I went out to the compete one year, and he called me ahead of time, Steve, you're going to be at the compete? And he's, more than other times, because I've seen him at the compete, we hung out a lot. He really wanted to hang out and just kind of hang out with me. We really talked about just good old bonding times. And he ended up, I think, passing 4 months after that. But I think he knew at that point. He just didn't want to let anybody know.
Right.
So he was, I think, our first team member to actually pass. And it rocked me because A, it made me feel like, gosh, my life's moving along. And B, well, actually, A, was one of my closest friends and teammates just passed, and it rocked me. And B, it made me feel like, my life's moving along, and like, wow, all of a sudden, at that point in my life, I had friends that were actually passing and stuff too. It made me feel a little older. So I don't mean to say it in a joking manner, but
Well, let's wind the clock back a little bit, right? If you're feeling old, we'll wind the clock back back, right?
Wow.
So one of the highlights of Team Paul Mitchell, the coming out party, if you will, where Paul Mitchell kind of said, "We arrived. We're one of the best teams in the world," is there's a story of this legendary team fight at the Palace at Auburn Hills where they played NBA games, and it was an arena, right?
Yeah.
Take us through that. It was a Paul Mitchell team fight against Transworld Order.
It was on USA national television. And I think the arena was pretty much filled. I don't know, 7,000 people in the audience, I think. It was my biggest team fight ever. We went there as Team Paul Mitchell. This tournament, at that time, the Detroit tournament, had $50,000 in grand championship prizes. The most important thing for us was to beat Transworld Oil. We had lost to them a few times.
How much in grand championship prize?
$50,000 in grand championship.
Back then?
Yes.
That's a lot of money for a
Yes.
karate tournament.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Carry on. Go ahead.
Yes. And we didn't compete at all in our divisions where some of us could have won and maybe went on to win some big money. You know what I'm saying? Nope. We all said as a team that we're just going to focus on beating Transworld Oil this weekend. This is it. And all we did was eat, breathe, and sleep. That point fighting match, and re-go over scenarios, and re-go over scenarios, and re-go over scenarios. We had like 6 team members we were potentially using because we had an alternate, and we did like 2 rooms with 3 people, and we were right next to each other, so we just lived with each other all weekend long. We actually went out. It wasn't the best Rocky movie, but we went out to see Rocky V that weekend, and we just hung as a team, ate as a team, and did everything as a team. And then we were in our locker room. The big time was coming, and Bill Wallace comes into our locker room. We all idolized Bill Wallace. This was in the early 90s, you know what I'm saying?
Everybody still does.
Yeah. And he sat there and pumped us up, and I'm like, come on. How much better can this? I'm pumped, you know what I'm saying? So then we went out there, and one solace that we had is Kevin Thompson wasn't at this tournament for Transworld Oil on the other side. But they had great fighters. They had great fighters there. And
take us through the rosters real quick. What was on
I think it was, first match was, I think they had Tony Young was the final match. I fought Anthony Price. Richard Plowden for Alberto Montron. John Payton, I think, was the beginning match against Terry Creamer. And Chris Rapold was fighting Jeff Gears. So there was, first match was John Payton, Terry Creamer. Toe-to-toe match. I mean, Terry Creamer was, he's as much of a defensive fighter as he can be an offensive fighter. He didn't give up too many moves. I remember one technique in specific I really liked from John Payton, who, in my opinion, was one of the best blitzers I've ever seen. Blitzers to be a fighter with it, too. I mean, it was one of the hardest punches I've ever seen. And I saw him go to do a blitz. Terry Creamer went to fly back with his patented jump back fist. And he pulled short on his blitz, used his step as a step, and did a spinning back kick and hit him with a spinning back kick turn. That's the one technique I remember from that match.
And had that been game planned? Was that something he trained
for?
Terry Creamer?
No. Well, this stuff is all spontaneous at that point. I mean, Jeff Gears and Chris Rapold. Chris Rapold was working really good reverse punches and ridge hands at that time. And
Another one of the Paul Mitchell executive team members, by the way, our executive director.
Our curveball match, which could have went either way, was Alberto Montron with Richard Plowden, because Richard Plowden's such a technical fighter. It's almost like we were thinking at that time, Alberto Montron was like unorthodox. And sometimes when you put unorthodox against technical at that time, you can either, the unorthodox could get his tail whooped, and it could have been an error, or it could have made things tough and made it a little bit even. And that's what it ended up doing, made it even. So I think we went into my match against Anthony up 2, which was good. And like, if they bring it back to 0-0, my match was huge. If they bring it back 0-0, Pedro's going to have his hands full with
Tony Young.
Tony Young, yes, with Tony Young. Pedro's going to have his hands full with him. So, hey, listen, I end up winning the match by 3. We're up 5. I come back, and let me tell you something. I have all the respect in the world for Anthony. I just had a good night that night, and Anthony, maybe being down, made a wrong decision. I think he ran into one of my roundhouses, and it was a big technique. It changed the match around. After that, we were kind of just fencing back fist on back fist on reverse punch, or reverse punch on back fist. That could have won either way. The roundhouse was the big technique. But that could have went either way. Anthony's a great fighter. But we're up by 5. I run back. I go to coach. We're up by 5 with Pedro going in, one of the best defensive side kickers I've ever seen in the universe at that point. I go, we got this. He's going, stay back, Steve. Stay back. Not yet. Stay back. We're all just back there like this. And we end up winning. I think it might have been by 7, but we end up winning. And it was the coming out for our team to be able to win that match. It was the coming out. It was huge. They have 3-man team fights right now. They have 3-man team fights that say this is the best team or that's the best team. They do them in 90 seconds. I'm not a big fan of the 3-man team fight rules because you can step out of bounds or you can fall down. So now if a person falls down and gets up and gets ready to engage again, between the fall down, get up and get ready to engage, doing 7 seconds is gone in the match. You could do some other things. Really, you can do techniques to where before you know it, you're only fighting 30 seconds out of 90 seconds. And then you're doing a 3-man team fight. I don't think in ways they tell who the best team out there. I like the forum. I do at least in team fighting, down is a warning, then a point the other way, and out is out. So it makes people fight more. And then it could judge the better team at that point. But at that time, we were doing 5-man team fights. And I think they were the normal time, 2-minute rounds. So I think it really evaluated a little different that our team was really becoming an excellent contender at that point. I don't think we're the best team in the world. When they announced Trans World on USA TV, this is perhaps the best karate team you will ever see. And they called us the Hair Care team, and they called them the best karate team they'd ever see. So
it's funny how that wound up being a passing of the torch in a way.
It was, but it made us a legitimate contender at that time. You know what I'm saying? Because they were an awesome team. You know what I'm saying? So it made us a legitimate contender. Gave us legitimacy. You know what I'm saying? But go ahead.
You bringing up Pedro fighting the anchor reminds me of, because just while we're telling Paul Mitchell stories, right, especially in team fights, there's a story that Coach Rodriguez always tells about, Pedro's team fights. Pedro gets up and wins the fight for us or something like that. And then Coach goes to give him a high five. Pedro does the jump spinning hook.
That was in that fight.
It was that fight? That's what I wanted to ask. It was that fight.
We were as pumped as could be. It was getting near the end. Pedro just hit him with a defensive side kick. Tony was being as savvy as he could be because he knew if he blitzed him, I think we were up at 5. We'd be up by 7 at that point. So to get that 2-point technique with the defensive side kick, all of a sudden we were like, and here comes Pedro jogging around. Coach just wanting the high five, and Pedro does this spreading his legs, jump, spinning hook kick, and we were like, just relish the moment. It was awesome. It was awesome. Very awesome. A lot of my team fights were awesome.
And so you mentioned one of the things that you guys were happy about in that particular instance was that Trans World Oil's one of their main competitors, Kevin Thompson, wasn't there, right? And clearly,
we knew that ahead of time.
History would go on to tell that Kevin Thompson would join our team and become the greatest competitor of all time in the eyes of many, right?
I think, yes.
And peeling back the wall here, just to our left at the front of Mr. Babcock's karate school.
Break him out.
Oh, he's going to bring him out. So what he's got here is he's got 2 white point fighting gloves with Paul Mitchell logos on them, signed by Kevin Thompson. And I believe that watch from the Bluegrass Nationals is the watch that Kevin won, is it not?
Yep.
So tell us the story of these gloves.
When Kevin knew he was retiring, he said to me, "You are my hands." And he wrote on these gloves, because I used to, when he was a senior competing and I competed a little bit, and we would make sure we were by each other's rings. So I was at all his fights. So I'd be the one coaching him at the ring of me, and he just wrote down the things I would say. You told me to keep blitzing. thank you for everything. You told me to keep blitzing. My friend, keep punching. And Kevin gave me his hands. And he said, and he gave, I believe he gave Coach his helmet. You were my mind or something. I don't remember the exact breakdown, and he said, you were my hands out there. So the day he passed,
Take your time.
I felt he gave me his hands. Hands to hold me up because I needed them that day. So these are cherished. I cherish these. So let me put them back.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, and for anybody watching that isn't as familiar with the sport karate world, I mean, Kevin Thompson, like I said, widely considered the greatest sport karate competitor of all time. As you may or may not know, was diagnosed with ALS back in 2012. He didn't know it at the time, but that's what caused his retirement from sport karate. And he just passed away in January, was it?
Yes.
And so somebody that's very, even I had, a few interactions. Kevin had retired by the time that I came on the team because he retired in 2011. I was on the team in 2012. But I mean, he was still, around, you know what I mean? And even after he was diagnosed and his condition was declining, he would come to the Ocean States and give us team meetings and give us some speeches and things like that. And I still remember, I'll just tell one of my favorite personal Kevin Thompson stories is I remember being at the U.S. Open, and I wasn't even any good yet. I sucked at the time. So I was this nobody competitor, right? I don't know about that. I was essentially a nobody competitor at the U.S. Open, and I was competing against one of Kevin's sons. And his son had forgotten his bow at home. They didn't bring it on the plane or whatever. And Kevin noticed that I had several bows because I've always been a bow competitor. And so, I knew who he was, obviously. And so he comes over to talk to me in my head. Like I'm freaking out, right? And then, he was just so down to earth.
That's the way I felt.
And it was just so chill. He was like, hello, sir. He called me sir. Hello, sir. How are you? He gave me the handshake, which is notorious as the strongest handshake in the history of sport karate. And, asked just in the politest of ways, not, you would expect somebody that is of that stature to be just a little bit arrogant, you know what I mean? And Kevin had not a drop in the milk, right? And, just asked if, he could borrow a bow. We gave him a bow and his son competed with it. And that was that. And, that was before I was ever even thinking about being on Team Paul Mitchell. I was dreaming of it, but I wasn't thinking it was a reality yet. That was a really cool moment. So while we're on that topic, take us back to his competitive career on Paul Mitchell. Best highlight to you.
Well, for Kevin, I mean, I don't necessarily have like a best highlight because he had so many. And the thing about it wasn't just in fighting. It would be in forms and weapons. But to me, it was the fact of how hard he trained to how consistent he could be tournament after tournament after tournament. One of my best highlights was when I think he was almost 50 years old. This is just before he retired because of ALS, and he even knew at that point he had ALS, is he won the grants at the U.S. Open, beating a lot of the young kids. And I think he actually bowed out in his last match, and I think that guy was happy because Kevin could bang just because he wanted to go over and compete and do the grants and cut, and he didn't want to miss that. But his consistency, I used to tell the fighters on my team, come and watch, because they'd be in some of their own rings. I said, if you ever get a chance, I want you to watch Kevin's matches. Because some of these young guys would be sitting there like talking about how to get points and stuff, and I have this technique and I have that technique, but I've never seen so many 1-0 matches or 1-1 or 2-1. I don't think I've seen really 3 points very rarely scored on Kevin Thompson. His defense was impeccable. So he was in every match and then knew how to take them with utter efficiency in every match. I just loved watching the way the guy's mind worked when he sparred. I just loved it when he did everything. And For the time on the team, maybe 4 tournaments a year. We do 7, but maybe out of 4 tournaments a year for most of the circuit, he and I would room together. So that's where the that's where the gloves come off. That's where the sparring gear comes off. That's where even tournament talk comes off sometimes, and we could just be roommates and real good friends, just real good friends. And he really, as people go through their life and they go through, like, I had gone through a divorce at one time, and there were other challenges in my life. He was probably one of the biggest persons in my life that I could use as a sounding board to kind of help me through this stuff, you know what I'm saying? And then he'd throw some of his own stuff back at me, and then, we really became, in the beginning we weren't as close friends. He was a teammate, but he was this new star we pulled on. But then through time, he, in the easiest way, he was a normal human being, and we became the closest friends. But I would say we became the closest friends, and I would tell you this, that I think he admired me the way I admired him. But I don't believe that, because I had to hide, just so we could kind of make it look like it was equal, that I admired him way more. And I think everybody feels that way about who knew Kevin, because there was just something about this man that was a tick above anybody else. There was just something about him, and that I admired, and it made me, in arguments or in decisions and stuff, when we were kind of talking about things, really heed to his better suggestions at some point, ignoring my own at some point, because I think that he had it going. And he was just a great friend. Good friends, you're supposed to really learn and be around good friends, and that's what he was to me. So much that I have a baby son on the way now, and his name's Kevin.
That's awesome. And congratulations on that,
Thank you.
by the way. I don't know how public that was.
A month and a half away.
Baby on the way. That is, that's so cool. And it was that part of Kevin Thompson that really cemented him as the greatest of all time. You know what I mean? His competitive prowess clearly put him in that position.
Yeah.
But, in any sport, whoever's the GOAT, right, they have some type of lore about them, right? Mm-hmm. We just saw a ton of it in the Jordan documentary, things like that, right? And Kevin, his lore was how down to earth and just how genuine he was.
He could walk the walk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everything he showed in the ring, he was actually more as a human being. Mm-hmm. He had, I think, became his vice principal one year at his school, and then was charged at his school with changing policies. And he went through a complete policy change, and in that year in New Jersey, that school was recognized as the biggest GPA average change out of the whole state. He affected human beings, and he actually wanted substance, not just talk, to back up what he could do. And he was a man amongst men, and there's nobody in my life who has affected me more than that man. He's just a wonderful man. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'd go over his house. I'm a tournament pool player, and there's a lot of things I do, and I would go over his house, and all of a sudden, I'd be at his house, he had a pool table at his house, and some friends would show up, and I think I could, toast him a little bit. And his friends would come over and beat me. And anything I went at his house for, all of a sudden this came up. And one person I'm impressed with also, maybe runs in the family, is his brother Earl. His brother Earl is a fantastic pool player. And he's great at whatever he does. I see it runs in the family. They're proud. They're proud, and they own what they say. And I really admire. I admire all his friends I met when I was over his house, and all his friends I met when I was around. I admire them because they're that of Kevin. They're that of that type of person.
Great people surround themselves.
Yeah, and I admire his brother. I admire him, and it's a relief to sometimes when I'm around people and I see a lot of slips and things happen. I think I kind of hold the fort a little bit to show like this is kind of the way we roll. When I'm around I can kind of kick back because I know I just roll like them and I'm going to be good, because they're really genuine good people. All his friends.
Absolutely. And so, and that's, so many reasons that every martial artist should look up to Kevin. If you don't know who he is, go on YouTube. There's plenty of videos and you can at least see what he was like as a competitor. Last question that I want to get to. In a history of over 30 years of Team Paul Mitchell, a lot has to change from divisions at tournaments to what tournaments actually exist to the competitors on the team. I mean, everything changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about how you have seen the sport change and how has the team evolved over the course of those 3 decades.
Some of the way the sport has changed is there are less fighters now. I think fighting, I like the evolving of fighters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I got in the 80s, I always heard that the people from the 70s and 60s, they were better bangers. So of course the people from the 80s and 90s are going to say that the people from the 2000 and 2010, you know, they always like to talk and create, have their fireside talks that they were the better bangers in the 80s and 90s. But to be honest with you, you know, you got the fighters like the Raymond Daniels camp that came out there, and some great fighters out of that camp. And I think they're as good point fighters now, if not better. And so I think the sport, as far as fighting, has evolved. I think the sport, as far as kata's evolved, and the people and the fighters from the 80s and 90s and the kata people from the 80s and 90s should sit back being proud that they kept this legacy going, and it's getting better and it's better, getting better and it's getting better. In my heart, it still comes back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? The basics from the 50s and the 60s. In my heart, it still comes back to that. But I think that the top champions that we have in the sport are an example of those basics. Absolutely. And an example of the etiquettes of the martial arts. So I like how the sport has grown and evolved. I think there are better fighters now. I think there are better kata competitors now. There's less fighting right now as far as fighters out there. And one time there was it was really good as far as that went. And I'd really like to see the promoters, to be honest with you. I'd really like to see NASCA promoters, because I think they offer a good circuit to follow.
Absolutely.
I really like to see a lot more unity within the promoters to be able to really, because I think there are a lot of great fighters out there, and some just choose not to go to events. You know what I'm saying? I'd really like to see the promoters do something that could really make the competitors, I think kata people, the kata competitors get shown some good love from the promoters, but I don't know sometimes if the fighters do. You know what I'm saying? And I think if you were to look at, like, I'm going to use an analogy of a football team. Everybody sits back and says, you know, like, this wide receiver's awesome, and look how great he did. Look at that running back. But a lot of them don't do it if they don't get that front line. Mm-hmm. And I think the front line of even sport karate is still a little bit of that fighting that they don't get the praise. And I'd really like to see some sort of love shown to the fighters. And I think more fighters would come back out and would start getting big. Because I've had promoters talk to me sometimes about, hey, can you send a few fighters here, and can you do this? And truthfully, I like to see the tournaments bigger. It wouldn't be just my team sending fighters there. I like to see other teams send fighters to some of these tournaments too. So I'd really like to see NASCA unify a little bit more. Even for all the competitors in general, I like to see them show a little bit more love to all the competitors in general, because I think the competitors is who really makes the sport. You know, and I really would like to see that happen. So,
yeah, very cool. I agree with that. And so, with regards to Team Paul Mitchell specifically, that was a great synopsis of kind of the state of fighting and where it was and where it's come to. With the team specifically, what has changed from a leadership position? How have you had to change anything about how you led the team? Has that been consistent?
Well, I know something. I myself, I have some staple things I look at. The solace I have is I used to, Coach and I used to do a lot of the picking of members. What I'm really psyched about now is that we have coaches that help. Right. I mean, Damon Gilbert, you know what I'm saying? He's fantastic. You know what I'm saying? Lauren Kearney, fantastic. So the fact that we can, and what we really do on this team is, there are things I do that are good, and I think the executive team recognizes what I do good. There are things that Christian Pohl does that are good. There are things that Damon does that are good. And we bring all those, like cogs, all those good things to the table, and all work well with each other. So as far as the team goes now, when creation of the executive team happened, it was a real help because I was actually, Coach went through some little things health-wise, I think years ago, and I was running things by myself for a little bit. And it was a real help to really kind of move forward with the team and really do bigger things with the team. I love the fact, and a lot of it came on through the vision of Chris Rapole with getting Century as our apparel sponsor. So, you know, I really like the input, and really, I think as far as what I do to pick players and run the team, I have my own little knack that goes way back to 30 years ago. And I have to make little changes along the way. You know, I have to make little changes, but you stick to your basics. But the big thing that happened was the bringing on of the executive team and the different minds. And then me having to open up and really listen to and really, really appreciate different minds and the things they brought to the table. Because truthfully, I love it. And these people have become closer and closer to me, and we've been a big family through the years. So that was probably the bigger change that I ran into, was the executive team as in the last 8 years. So.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned how you've always had, you know, an interest and had a hand in recruiting. Sometimes it was all on you and Coach at times, things like that, right? So for any competitors out there watching right now, young competitors, they know the history, right, through episodes like this podcast, and they've been watching YouTube videos. They've decided that they want to represent the greatest sport karate team to ever compete. They want to represent Team Paul Mitchell, right? What does it take for any young athlete, kata, fighting, whatever? What do you look for? What does the team look for? I know the answer, but tell them, help them. What does it take?
What I think is just like the way I started this podcast when he talked to me about what did it take to be undefeated that season. And I can tell when I'm looking at a competitor that they're in the moment and that all their trainings and everything they do are there right at that time. And when I can see that in different competitors and some of the 2, 3, 4 top competitors per division, when you're looking at them, you can see that. Then there are little things that separate, that make a person become first and second. We don't always pick up the first place person. We might pick up the third place person or the second, because you can see potentially where they're going to grow to. But it's that I'm in the moment and I train my tail off for this second right now. And I don't have like, hold it, I can't find this in my bag, or this isn't happening. That interrupts me. I'm focused 10 minutes before I go there, and I can see that in the competitors. I see the way they prepare before their ring, I see the way they compete in their ring, and I see the way they can even lose in their ring, and lose with grace. Because humility is part of the sport, and you're never going to go on to do those big things if you don't have a little humility and can lose properly. So, you know, I look at that, I look at that big picture. And of course, you have to know how to win, too. Win with grace, too.
Absolutely.
So that's
excellent message. I think that should help a ton of young competitors that want to one day go on to represent Team Paul Mitchell. I can't thank you enough for your time, brother.
Always.
Much appreciated.
You're
Love you, bro.
You're welcome.
And if anybody has any questions, we're going to be hanging out, so feel free. Drop some comments down below. Let us know if you have any questions. We're more than happy to respond. This has been episode 28 of the Jack Rudolph podcast, once again brought to you by Black Belt Magazine. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
See you later.